It's great to see everyone, and really appreciate you being here. I guess Rebecca's going to get us started, but let me just say a couple of words to get us started. As you know, the tariffs have been put on hold for 30 days, and we have no idea what's going to happen in 30 days. And there's a lot of incredible disruption that's occurring. First, with what happened with the order to suspend all funding. You know, that was declared illegal by the courts, but it's still causing a lot of disruption, particularly for folks in the nonprofit world. We're sorting that out. Then, to these the tariffs are also of enormous concern because it has real practical impacts on enterprises, your companies, your ability to do your work. And it's a combination of A, the uncertainty, B, there's a real question of how tariffs are applied. And there's an enormous amount of uncertainty as to whether is specific a question as to whether it's a certain kind of aluminum the tariff applies. If it's not, it doesn't. Third, the history of this tariff last time around was that those who were well connected and knew how to get to the administration oftentimes were able to work out an exemption. And that'll be very tough for Vermonters because we just don't have that size and scale to get us in the door for exceptions. And number four, we had a roundtable with our businesses up in Franklin County. Every single one of the businesses explained to us that they're on a tight margin already. And any tariff that was imposed ultimately would have to be passed on to the consumer. So it would increase prices. The one thing I do want to say that I find heartening is I came from an agricultural committee hearing this morning. And, you know, that's a majority of Republicans on that committee now, but with Democrats. But the questions that were being raised by my Republican colleagues included a lot of questions about the impact of tariffs on their communities, on their rural communities. And it wasn't just the farms, it was the businesses that were in those communities. So what I'm seeing is that the concerns that I've heard expressed to me by Vermonters are concerns that are being expressed to my Republican colleagues in states that President Trump won by a large margin. But it's a practical question because the folks who were talking to my colleagues in the Senate, who are Republicans, that they are saying to them, those senators, very similar things to what I'm hearing from Vermonters. So on the ground, whatever the impact of the tariff is, it's going to affect both Republicans and Democrats. And then I think that helps put us in a position to push back when there's a tariff that's going to have detrimental impact on the businesses that we all want to be successful. So I'm going to stop there. And Rebecca, turn it over to you.
Thanks, Peter. Actually, Fauna Hurley is going to moderate today's discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Fauna.
Yep, no problem. Thanks, Senator Welch. So we have a pretty large group today. So we are going to use the raise hand feature to run this. I'm also going to put my email in the chat as well as a form on our website if we don't get to you. But we are going to ask if participants can please limit your comments to maybe 1 to 2 minutes so that we have a chance to hear from as many folks as we can and wrap this up as close to 3:45 as we can. So with that, I'll look to anyone who is raising their hand, which I don't see anyone yet. Any brave people want to start us out? I will also mention that, as you all know, this is being recorded and there's also press on this call. Jason Williams. And if you can say your name and the organization you are with, thank you.
Thank you, Fauna. You know me not to be shy. Thank you, Senator, for hosting this conversation. My name is Jason Williams, and I'm with the University of Vermont Health Network. we're concerned about the overall impact on the broader economy of tariffs, especially if they become a tool that's used more liberally. We know that in Vermont, many of our economic crises and affordability crises tie back to our ability for our businesses to grow, for us to build homes, and for us to attract new folks to our state. I want to touch on one piece that might be unique in the conversation today, and that's the impact on pharmaceuticals. And I'm going to break it down into two parts, both the ingredients and generic drugs. So the ingredients that are used to make pharmaceuticals, about 13% are made in China or come from China, and 8% of our final products, so the final pharmaceutical product, comes from China. University of Vermont Health Network spends $400 million a year on pharmaceuticals. This tariff, we estimate, could increase our pharmaceutical costs alone by 10%.
Wow.
As it stands.
Wow.
The second part is generic drugs, which are, again, a broader concern if we're putting tariffs on additional countries. 90% of all prescription drugs are generics, and we have very little domestic production. We're purchasing these much closer to the production cost, and so that margin is slim. Adding a tariff will either lead to drug shortages in the short term or long-term significant price increases. So as we think about healthcare affordability, these tariffs present a real challenge in that space. Thank you.
Thank you. That is brutal. Thank you.
Next on my screen, I have Jason Mari from the Food Bank.
Hi, Senator Welch. Thanks for having us today. I just wanted to bring a light on how this might affect the charitable food system that may not be top of mind, and that one of our, if not our largest vendor, is a farm in Canada, in Quebec. And we've had a partnership with this company for over 15 years. And it has been fantastic. And you may ask why Canada and why not a domestic product, but they're about the closest farm to us. There's not that many large farms in our region to choose from. And they're able to provide the quantity that we need, the pricing that we need, the flexibility that we need, and the variety that we need. So this, if the 25% tariff was applied in full, it would be about $130,000 to $150,000 unbudgeted hit to our food procurement efforts. And as a charitable organization, we don't have a consumer to pass along that cost to. So our only recourse is to either raise money or reduce the amount of food that we can distribute.
And that's in real time.
That's in real time. And as you know from being at the food bank, that produce is one of the most highly sought after and desirable products. So it's already pretty expensive. So I just wanted to share that impact.
That has real ripple effects. So thank you. And we had Pool and Grain when we were up in St. Albans doing our roundtable, and they just talked about how they have to get so much from the product from Canada to help our Vermont farmers, and it would have to be passed on to farmers who are struggling with tight margins. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I have Catherine next, and just as a reminder to please identify the organization you're with. Thank you.
Thank you, Fauna. Hi, Senator Welch. This is Catherine Durand with Agrimark Dairy Co-op. Thank you so much for having us. So I'm going to, when you think of Agrimark, I know you know us well, but we are primarily dairy farmer owned, we are dairy farmer owned. So I primarily think of us from the farm side of things, but we also have our manufacturing footprint, which is equally important in this regard. So I think first and foremost, from a dairy perspective, the headline concern that we have is if we see retaliation here. I would say sitting here today, given that we have the 30-day pause, I'm most concerned about China. For Agrimark in particular, we sell a lot of our whey products over to China. We've seen disruptions there before and how they can ripple to not only our business, but the broader dairy economy. So that's what I am primarily concerned about. As you know, when it comes to farmers' milk prices, those are based on the commodity markets. We export a significant amount of powder and cheese into Mexico. A lot of milk products make their way into Canada as well. So what we're worried about from a broad strokes perspective is what are those commodity markets reactions to if we see retaliatory tariffs and the impact that that would have on farmers, dairy farmers across the United States, agrimark farmers, and individual businesses. As was just mentioned by the previous speaker, or actually it was you talking about Pool and Grain, in addition to the market and the price side of things, I'll also mention the input side is really concerning. So as you mentioned with Pool and Grain, concerned about those feed commodities, energy markets, the impact on that for farmers, fertilizer. I think the list can go on, and we're just starting to learn how broad that could be. Similarly, at the manufacturing level, we do have some supplies that are coming out of Canada. And then in addition, even if we are not directly sourcing from Canada or Mexico or China, the ripple effects that this could have on energy markets, and of course, manufacturing is very heavy on that, and many other supplies. So I think I'll leave it there, but I hope that gives you just some broad strokes of what we're concerned about for our farmer owners directly on their farm, as well as our farm owners as an owner of a manufacturing operation.
No, that was very helpful, and it's consistent with what I've been hearing. And by the way, I do have to say this. I just don't understand the national security justification for imposing tariffs on our closest ally and friend, Canada. I mean, they're not a threat. I haven't seen. Anyway, but that we have such close relations with Canada in particular, we want to maintain them and not do anything to jeopardize them. But thank you very much for that, Catherine.
Thank you, Senator.
Dave Snedeker.
Thanks, Fauna. Hi, Senator Welch. Dave Snedeker with the Northeastern Vermont Development Association up in the Northeast Kingdom. So at one point from 2013 to 2019, we had a foreign trade zone designation for the 3 NEK counties plus Lamoille County. And at sunset, because no business ever activated with Customs and Border Protection, which is a requirement. But now we're getting interest in businesses asking if we can restart our zone, and just wondering what the likelihood of that is, given the Congress and these FTZs are a good way to eliminate or avoid duties. So just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't have thoughts on that because you're bringing this up fresh for me. But what I'll do, Dave, is we'll get back to you, because that would be exciting if we could get that and enhanced trade between the Northeast Kingdom and Canada. So we'll do that offline if that's okay with you.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Got Kevin Waller next.
Yeah, that's me. Thank you. My name is Kevin Lawyer. So I'm sure I'm going to represent potentially a minority here, but I work for a company called H2O Leader or H2O Innovation. I used to work for 10 years for a company called Leader Evaporator, which is a U.S. maple manufacturer in northwestern Vermont. A couple of years ago, we were acquired by a large water company, H2O Innovation, based out of Quebec City, and with manufacturing centers in Ham Nord, Quebec, and Champlin, Minnesota. 3/4 of their staff are on the coastlines of the U.S., and more recently, they've actually moved private to New York City. So it's technically a U.S. company, but still based headquarters out of Quebec City. So I can say that I sort of play both sides now. But my life is spent in the U.S. and Vermont. And I think that we'll call it devil's advocate, is that I've seen the pressure, at least in manufacturing in northwestern Vermont, from Canada. And we'll say some of the unfair practices that are natural in their manufacturing centers compared to what we deal with in northwestern Vermont in stainless steel manufacturing. So I would, let's say, for the general farmer that we sell to, and the passionate fabricator that works for our company in the U.S., they look at this as positive. And ultimately, I think it creates more of an on-par or on-par manufacturing versus what we deal with in Canada. About 80% of the world market for maple syrup production is in Canada. If you consider the large 4 manufacturers, our manufacturing center is one of the 4 that is challenged by that offset in money. So I think ultimately it may be positive for us because we're still sourced primarily in the U.S. versus everything else in Quebec. I think the risk that I see long term or maybe even short term is not unlike COVID, where U.S. manufacturers or U.S. vendors that we still source through may increase their prices if we see tariffs. So if that happens for us, it may affect us negatively, but it's ultimately, I think that some of our people think this is a positive move.
So when you say some of your people, who are you talking about? Not individual names, but
I think internally and externally staff in our network, we have about 100 dealers US wide and obviously thousands of customers. I think the general farmer feels like this is good for the US manufacturing market versus in maple versus Canada. So, I mean, there's multiple factors, fixed cost and the tax system.
Yeah.
I think that if we start a company in manufacturing, it's just cost less to make the same product up north.
okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Matt Coda.
Yes, thank you, Senator Welch. So I work for Meadow Hill. We're a firm that represents trade associations in the gasoline, car, truck sellers, heating oil, and heating equipment. And a third of our product, our energy products, our gasoline, diesel fuel, heating oil, propane, comes from Canada, the 2 refineries in Quebec and the one in New Brunswick. The largest and most popular producer of heating oil tanks is Granby up in Quebec, which would be a 25% mandate. Many of our cars, obviously the parts or the cars themselves, assembled in Mexico or Canada. We're grateful for the pause and hopeful you can do what you can do to make sure it never comes back. Thank you.
Thanks.
Dylan Giambattista.
Yes, thank you for convening this forum. I'm Dylan Giambattista. I am with Vermont Gas. We, of course, are a natural gas utility in Northwest Vermont. We serve 56,000 customers in Franklin, Chittenden, and Addison counties. Just to echo what Matt said about the energy sector here, this is very complicated, and estimating tariff impacts is complicated for us as an organization. It really wasn't clear until February 1st, just a few short days ago, when we learned that the executive order would lead to a 10% tariff on Canadian energy imports. We weren't sure what the impact would be. And even then, the order lacks some details that we will need to operationalize it. Of course, we get 100% of our natural gas from Canada. So a 10% tariff on Canadian energy will mean a direct rate impact for our customers in the region. And based on what we know, and some details remain unclear, so this is an initial estimate, we would estimate that gross impact between $6 and $7 million. As a customer-focused organization, we are going to work to mitigate rate impacts, but how we can do that will depend on timing. So as we look to the next steps in this, we really want to understand when these tariffs will take effect, what they will mean, and we'll be working with our state regulatory partners to ensure that impact to customers is as minimal as possible. So thank you for all of your work, and I want to commend your staff. They've been so responsive the past several weeks. We've had many questions, and we really appreciate the team effort. Thank you.
Well, thanks. And Matt and Dylan, yesterday with Senator Shaheen, we spoke on the floor about what the impact is. And she spoke about how New Hampshire, and this is true for us, we get our gas and our heating oil largely from Canada. So, and we don't have another option. It's not like the supply system is set up so that you can just flip the switch and get gas that's produced here domestically. So it would be killer for a lot of folks who get nervous when they see the heating fuel truck show up, because that's a big hit on the monthly budget. So thank you.
Matt Cook.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Senator Welch. Thanks for having us. So I'm Matt Cook, President and CEO at PC Construction. Many of you know PC, but we're the largest construction company headquartered here in Vermont with 8 offices from Maine to Florida, so up and down the East Coast. In the Northeast, we're primarily doing commercial building construction. In the Southeast, we're primarily doing water, very large water, wastewater treatment plants. But just to go back quickly, construction industry in general, I think we all know the story. Since COVID, we've seen significant cost increases in materials, labor, higher interest rates, which alone have put the brakes on many, many projects. Many of these projects that aren't moving forward are housing projects, right? And we've all heard lately the talk of housing and the need for housing in Vermont. But we've got housing projects that aren't moving forward because interest rates and materials and all those things that I mentioned are too expensive. Where I'm going with this, obviously, is just, we've seen a 40% increase roughly in the cost of construction. To add another 25% on certain materials or equipment would really just further that cost burden and make it even more impossible for projects to become a reality. In the Northeast, many of you know, a lot of our lumber comes from Canada. In the residential world, it's wood-framed homes, wood-frame multifamily. Same in the commercial world. A lot of I would say 80% of the structural steel in the Northeast comes down from Canada. And you can imagine, what a 25% tariff on a multi-million-dollar steel package would cost. Could simply sink construction projects. For Mexico, a lot of the drywall throughout the U.S. comes from Mexico. You can all imagine how much drywall is in a building. And then if you talk China or other overseas places, electrical components that currently already have long lead time. We've seen huge price escalation already. It's certainly just going to add to that. So I'm just concerned in general that it's going to further stagnate the ability for some of these much needed construction projects to move forward. Beyond the cost side, I'm also concerned there's legal ramifications too for contractors, owners, subcontractors, really all kind of pointing the finger at each other to figure out who's going to pay this, right? If we're under contract with an owner, many of these contracts don't have the ability to recover, right? Is it truly a force majeure issue?
Right.
It may not be. It's a change in law, which many construction contracts don't have change in law clauses. So I think it could get expensive for construction companies. It could get expensive for subcontractors and could really get into the legal system too. So.
Well, thanks for all you do, PC. Incredible company. But that practical experience you have where you've got these contracts. Pooling Grain, by the way, was saying the same thing. They have contracts to deliver oats. And what happens if suddenly the cost is up 25%? Who pays that? And neither really should pay it because it's not within the control of buyer or seller. So thank you for that.
Matt Musgrave.
Thank you, Senator, for having me out. My name is Matt Musgrave. I'm with the Associated Builders and Contractors of New Hampshire, Vermont. I'm the Vermont Regional Director. Also very happy to say that the previous speaker is one of our members at PC Construction. And I'm actually very happy he was here to help elaborate on some of the details that I was going to bring up. It gives me the opportunity to use my time to go to the other side of this conversation and how it impacts my members and the public at large. It's a workforce issue for folks. One of the discussions or one of the major missions that we have as our trade association is developing people in a marketplace that they're hard to come by. And in developing those people, that bringing them into these good paying jobs in the construction field. And so we get to know a lot about these individuals that are coming in. And one of the things that we're concerned about is these individuals, particularly in Vermont, because as nice as life is here, it's also very expensive to live. When you start adding a 25% tariff to different components of their lives, when we're already dealing with a lot of personal expenses, if you look at the cost of eggs going up, and then you pair that with someone that has to put gas in their car to get to work and accomplish their job, that's something that can be, and it is a barrier to people and employment. And that's something that the employers have, expressed to me in the past. And I've seen situations where employers have taken great strides to make work accessible and help people get to their jobs so that they can continue to run their lives. So I think in addition to what the costs are in terms of material costs, potential delays and uncertainty in the equipment model market, I think those same things can also be said in the workforce as well, because their inputs, whether it's the eggs that they're buying, the gas that they're buying, or some of the unforeseen circumstances we don't know, can have a meaningful impact on them. And then again, that just becomes one more input to our industry and construction, as well as other industries that can be a challenge. So thank you for holding this.
Well, thank you, Matt. That's really helpful. Thank you very much.
Melissa Bounty.
Apologies because I used Andy Jullo's link to get here, but I am Melissa Bounty of Central Vermont Economic Development Corporation. I have met with between 30 and 40 businesses in Central Vermont to talk about the tariffs, and I wanted to just do a little report on what I'm hearing. I spoke primarily with berry-based businesses. The granite industry is concerned about lack of clarity and concerned about raw goods cost, the cost of actually moving stone back and forth and what that will cost. And then we did a deep dive today with two family-owned businesses, one located in Quebec and one located in Barrie. And they are working together to produce large snowblowers for the airports. These are expensive pieces of equipment. They're sold for about $800,000, but final components cross the border 3 times in the process of putting them together. We ran the math, and it would add $14.5 million a year to the cost of producing these snowblowers, which neither company has the margin to support. So this would effectively put both companies out of business. And the concept of the contracts that are already in place, these are multi-year contracts to bring these snowblowers in by the airports, so they need to abide by the pricing and terms that they've already set up.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. I mean, that's pretty sobering.
Dave Foligno.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Dave Foligno. I'm a longtime maple producer, and I'm also on the board of directors for Farm Credit East. As you know, Peter, I appreciate your being on the Ag Committee. But maple straddles, the production region straddles the border between the US and Canada. And it's in a pretty small area of the world. But because it's in such a confined area, we are affected by things like currency changes. We would be strongly affected by the tariffs in terms of equipment costs for US producers, and also the inability to fulfill U.S. Accounts like Walmart or some of the big chains that buy Canadian syrup, because we simply don't produce enough here. The short-term consequence, for example, if the tariff went into effect this year, would be a kind of a short-term bounty, I think, for U.S. producers, because they would be able to raise their prices a little. But I think much like a 2-year effect would be to shrink the market because we couldn't meet all the demands in the US, and we would end up with lower prices on both sides of the border. So I'm very concerned with the possible effects of this. Already, even just the threat of the tariff has strongly affected Canadian currency. And as of yesterday, 2 days ago, the bulk syrup price went down 9% in the US as a currency adjustment.
Wow. That is really pretty scary. And, Dave, I remember the last Trump administration, of course, imposed tariffs. And what you're talking about is losing market share. And that had a really devastating impact on a lot of our Midwest farmers that had the big commodity crops. They had really great markets into China, actually, and even in other parts of the world. And they lost market share. and they've never recovered. You know, the tariffs were eased out, but they never got the market share back. So that's something that worries me. If you're in a market, you service the market, people get accustomed to it, you build up relationships, you're responsive to the market that you're serving. But then if you vanish for a few years because of a tariff or some other reason, you've got to knock on the door and reintroduce yourself and compete with somebody who's got a foothold in that market. So I worry about that as well. So thank you, Andy or Dave. Yep.
Thank you.
Dennis Burbo.
Good afternoon, everyone. Dennis Borbo from Borbo Custom Homes. I'm a small custom home builder in Franklin County. We build probably 5 to 6 homes a year. The biggest challenge that I see for the tariffs for the small custom home builders in the state is the inability to know what our costs are going to be. We're in the process of signing contracts and pricing the homes that we're going to be starting in 2025 with no clue of how much it's going to cost. So where do we put the contract price? I can foresee this making homes unaffordable, which they already are with the increased costs of the energy code requirements, and virtually impossible to put in clauses in our contracts for potential increases because these customers are going to the banks and getting an appraisal on the completed project with the bank only being allowed to finance a certain amount, where I can then say, well, my cost went up 25% on these certain products and pass it on to the consumer. But if the consumer doesn't have the access to the money to pay for it, it doesn't matter what I have written in my contract. And builders that are not proactive on what potentially the prices could be could put themselves out of business, basically building projects and coming in at a loss. I'm at a total loss of where to go as the policies change almost hourly when you're watching the news of where are we going to land? What's the price going to be? Because I'm writing contracts now and I'm going to be building these houses over the entire next 8 to 12 months. And where are all the costs going to be, from lumber to drywall, which are going to be the 2 big indicators, big price points. But as we get into the smaller electronics and all of the other parts and pieces, appliances, et cetera, that go into a house, it's going to greatly affect our costs, and we're heading into a total unknown. And I'm not sure what the resolution is or how we can, as I'm the president, or I'm on the board of the Vermont Home Builders Association, and I'm not sure how to advise our builders in the state on how to proceed.
You know, that is such a real world legitimate concern. And that, you know, that's why I think that the burden should be on the proponent of a big policy change like the tariff to do no harm. And that means you've got to give some answers to these very practical questions. I mean, that's a real dilemma. You know, you price it. You can deal with maybe normal adjustments in various commodities that get priced. The bank makes a loan based on the price and also the credit score of the applicant. And suddenly a 25% increase, and the bank won't up the amount, and it's not as though that improves the credit of the applicant. So God, I don't have an answer for you on that, because there is an answer. I mean, it's totally uncertain, but it's all that uncertainty is created by a governmental policy, and you know, our job down here should be to make your job easier to do, not harder to do. So anyway, that's quite a compelling story.
Allison Hope.
Thank you, Senator. I'm Allison Hope. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Maple Sugar Makers Association. Dave Foligno did a nice job of articulating some of the issues, and I just wanted to dive a little deeper. About 85% of Vermont's maple syrup crop is sold to bulk packers and co-packers. And in the state, we have one of the largest co-packers in North America. And they are what allow us, while they blend with Canadian syrup, to create a market for Vermont maple syrup and pure maple syrup across the country. Like Dave said, we wouldn't be able to fulfill those markets with Vermont syrup, but our industry has grown in production almost 500% over the last 20 years. And these tariffs would go a long way towards potentially slowing that production. You know, the maple syrup industry keeps a large swath of, it's a different way to use the forest and ensure that the forest is healthy, which goes a long way towards carbon sequestration and carbon storage, which is incredibly important. So the co-packers have these large contracts with Whole Foods and Target and Wegmans and Costco. You can't go into a Costco without finding maple syrup. And more often than not, that maple syrup is packed here. But usually blended with Canadian syrup, who makes, 77% of the world's syrup, and the US makes the other 23%. After COVID and during COVID, sales of pure maple syrup increased, and those co-packers increased what they purchased to ensure that they had a supply that would work for those contracts. And just like home builders or anyone else, those contracts are already in place. They already have contracts to buy syrup from Canada. They already have contracts with all of the larger markets across the US, and they're buying from hundreds of Vermont producers. Those contracts are lost by pennies, easily lost by pennies. And like you said, Senator, once you lose that retail shelf space, good luck getting it back. We are important in Vermont, and we are an important single source sweetener, but we are in a cluttered shelf of sweeteners and table syrups, and we're not the least expensive. So getting that retail shelf space back is probably going to be next to impossible. The other piece would be the equipment. I know Kevin noted that from a manufacturing standpoint, they would appreciate having more manufacturing in the US. The large 4 equipment manufacturers, including H2O Leader, Dominion Grimm, CDL, and LaPierre, they're Canadian companies. And so at a time when maple sugar makers, just like Vermonters, are feeling the pinch for the increased costs of inputs, whether it's property taxes, equipment, everything they have to do to run their business, without an increased cost in the retail price or the bulk price, as Dave mentioned, of maple syrup, it continues to squeeze people out of this lifestyle. And so it could easily slow production, as folks who have off-farm jobs don't have to stay in production. And then that land is going to be untapped. So,
well, thank you for that. The point you just made is important too. H2O to a leader. I was listening carefully where I think Kevin said some folks thought it might help. What I understand is that Canada was all set to pull the trigger on retaliatory tariffs. So, whatever advantage we might have had with some manufacturing work that's done elsewhere, particularly in Canada, would vanish if they did retaliatory tariffs, and they will. I mean, they're going to have to. If we do something bad to them, their own people are going to demand that their politicians stand up for Canada. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Peter Kahn.
Peter Kahn with Sienna Construction. We are small builders down in Vergennes. And I just want to echo some of the things that were stated by the other builders and larger outfits. So we have a 14-unit workforce housing project coming up. We budgeted that last summer, and we did receive a low interest loan from VHFA. Much needed, super much needed housing. I can't overstate so this is mid-market housing. In Vergennes, we did a 10-unit building 2 years ago, and it filled up in 10 days. And so this is now a 14-unit building. But again, there's a big lag from when you budget to when you can get going. We're just about to close these loans now. We can start in March. Budgeted last summer. We anticipated some price increases, but nothing like 25% potential tariff on lumber. So virtually any dimensional lumber, 2x4s, 2x10s, 2x8s, and all the trusses come from Canada. I've been building for 25 years, and really, I think one shipment from a lumber yard came from the U.S., and that was during COVID, frankly. And that's when a 2x4 costs $12.50, or around $3 now. That would be the farm. So that kind of just jolt to our budget. There's just not room. So that is a very real concept of having a project sort of ready to go, getting hit with something like this, and then not being able to start it, which of course just compounds the problem with the housing shortage. So we also have we build single family homes as well, and we took a couple contracts, same problem. We did not anticipate this kind of increase. We did survive COVID with these increases, but it is no fun. And this was stated earlier, having a contract that we have to commit to and having just prices during the construction period sort of blew out of hand. I mean, we got through that, and then when this happened, it's like, oh boy, here we go again. So we've stopped taking contracts until things settle down and we see where this is headed. And we certainly hope we can secure lumber. Just one last thing, I might be burning up my 3 minutes here, but on Monday, we were trying to basically secure funding from our lumber yard. They got notice from their mills that they were, quote, pulling out of the market. They weren't even going to provide pricing because of this sort of chaotic last minute announcement of the tariff. And coming on Tuesday, no one knew what to do. Everyone just froze.
Wow. You said a lot of things that made me nervous, but you said something that was really chilling. You are not taking contracts now. I mean, that's the only way you have work. That's what you've got to have some visibility to keep your crews going and confidence that you can keep the lights on, and to be in a situation where there's such uncertainty that you are not taking contracts is very ominous to me. Thank you.
Thank you for doing this.
Thanks, Peter. Ashley Adams.
Hi, yeah, thank you. Ashley Adams. I own PG Adams. We're a small manufacturing business in South Burlington, employing 13 people. And for Senator Welch, I just really appreciate you hosting this event. You actually visited our little business here several years ago.
I remember that. You got the lights on, you had good people there, and you care about your people. You're a great Vermont success story.
I was going to say, I do not expect you to remember that, but wow, thank you. Yeah, so we produce truck frames for the heavy duty trucking industry. We serve individual owner operators.
You got a cool operation going there.
Yeah,
I loved it.
A mighty little place with some big equipment. We use over 800,000 tons of steel a year, and it's all sourced from the EU.
So only a Vermonter could do this. Oh my goodness.
So yeah, it's a very particular niche steel. There's no high tensile steel made in the US that meets the formability factor that we require to produce the truck frames. So news reports are inconclusive. Really don't know what's going to happen, but it's pointing to the possibility of a tariff on European steel. This did happen with Trump's trade war back in 2018. The tariffs on our steel were 25%. Huge. So I'm really worried. And, and then we have this odd situation where about 5% of our customers are in Canada. So if there's a retaliatory tariff, those customers will suffer from the 25% EU tariff plus whatever that retaliatory tariff is. So there's just so much unknown, and I'm concerned about the impact on our customers. I'm worried that we'll lose customers. The people using our product are the people who are hauling the goods that you and I purchase every day to make our lives work, right? And truck drivers are working class people trying to earn a living, support their families. And it's just, all of this hurts everyone. It makes everything more expensive. I'm not saying anything that any of us don't know, but just offering, my own perspective as a small business in Vermont, and just sharing the kind of fear with all of you right now around the great unknown. Thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I admire your company and your people.
We are getting pretty close to the end of this, but if everyone can be pretty quick, we can try and get as many as we can before the senator needs to move on. Thanks, Melanie Harrison.
Sure. I am Melanie Harrison. I'm a small organic dairy farmer in Addison, Vermont. I just want to give you a little perspective on how this would impact our business here. All of our organic grain in Vermont is currently being imported across the border from Canada.
Right.
So on our farm, between that and the sawdust bedding that we use, the total dollar impact would be somewhere around $80,000 to $100,000 of additional unplanned expense on our small organic dairy farm.
That's impossible.
Right. And so we have no immediate mechanism to pass that on to our consumers. And so that would make it something that would basically squeeze us out of the marketplace. If you think about the knock-on effect throughout the agricultural communities across the state, organic dairies are 25% of the dairy farms that are left in our state. And so losing those would be a big hit.
No, it'd be terrible. No, thank you so much. I just can't imagine $80,000 to $100,000 in a dairy operation where the challenges are enormous. The price of milk fluctuates. You've got to deal with all these other contingencies, and this one be inflicted on you from DC, essentially. It's terrible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Elise Magnan.
Hi, my name is Elise Magnan. I have a small organic vegetable farm in Plainfield, Vermont. One of the inputs that we use is propane for season extension. In the past, we get our propane from a Canadian company, and we've been able to sign a fixed contract at a low rate from year to year. We were planning on doing that this year, but we received an email in late January that they're no longer doing fixed contracts due to market volatility, and that we'll stick with a variable rate for the year, which was higher than our contracted rate was going to be, which increases the bottom line. It also introduces another element of uncertainty. So even though the tariffs aren't in effect, we're definitely already feeling the effects.
No, thank you. Thank you. You are, and you have constant uncertainty.
Johnny Thompson.
Hi, thanks Senator Welch for having this. I'm also a small scale vegetable farmer. I grow about 5 acres of mixed vegetables and tree fruit and nuts in Huntington. And like Elise mentioned, it feels like death by 1,000 cuts, what's kind of on the table here. Like not only inputs rising, like the propane, the potash, equipment, but also another concern that I have is, like I'm growing in a way that's ecologically responsible. A lot of my, my inputs are kind of higher than, so already my prices are kind of higher than what, the vegetables you're getting in the supermarket. And they're already kind of unaffordable to many of my neighbors. And so then, you add on everyone's, struggling already with housing and healthcare costs and then slap on these tariffs and already the inflation. I really I wonder about like, how my customers will handle any if I do, attempt to pass on these costs to them. In the past, I've relied on, like last year, I got like 10% of my gross income was from the crop cash program. So, and so who knows what's going to happen to SNAP, that funds that program. So, like the combination of all of these factors together just creates such an atmosphere of uncertainty and, for running a business in a a farm business in a solvent way. So thank you.
Well, no, thank you. I mean, 5 acres is a big deal that's being productively farmed, and your commitment to doing it in the most ecologically effective way, sustainable way is great. But that's expensive, and people are willing to pay more, but not way more, and so thanks for hanging in.
We'll do Steve Parks and then Dina Moses, and then Senator Welch will close.
Thank you, Senator Welch, for hosting this. It's important that I think you get this feedback from us. I'm representing Drop-In Brewing. We're one of Vermont's 70 or so craft breweries. We are responsible, I think we are the second biggest driver of tourism in Vermont, is the beer tours and people coming here to sample what Vermont has to offer in terms of beer. I know it's not the most important thing in the world, and it's a bit of a luxury, and some might consider it, but I consider it essential. But I think the tourism thing is important. That it's expensive to produce things in this state, and an extra tariff on grain in particular. We're talking about malted barley. A lot of people might think, well, we're not necessarily buying Canadian malt, but the American maltsters are buying a huge amount of barley that's grown in Canada, and that's on the list of things that's going to have a tariff supplied. Other brewers are buying from the EU as well, so we're looking at grain from Germany in particular. And added to that, obviously, the uncertainty and the potential for increases in energy, transportation, general cost of living, loan interest, all of that, cardboard products from chipboard and things like that tend not to get thought about, but those are all going to impact, and those all are all cost drivers for small Vermont businesses and small Vermont breweries. We're all working on a very slim margin, and COVID really kind of stuck it to us in that regard. And margins were significantly decreased. I love the way Vermont brewers have responded by paying living wages for their employees, and we've seen a dramatic increase in that. But that, of course, adds to the cost of doing business as well. So just want to put a bug in your ear, if I may, about to remember that Vermont tourism is also a huge driver of our state's economy.
Yeah, that link between what you do and tourism is a very compelling one. But thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Dina Moses.
Hi, I'm Dina Moses, and I run a small business called Vermont Weaving Supplies. It's a retail business. A lot of it's online. 90% of my product comes in from Quebec, and having no idea what's going to go on with the prices there is just, big questions. But the thing that I wanted to add about this is that the U.S. has lost its textile manufacturing capabilities.
Right.
It's all gone off seas. All of the factories are closed. We used to get our yarn from, the mill ends from the factories, and we can't bring that back without immense amounts of financial outlay. And I wish we could, but that is gone. And I would think that trade wars, part of the goal of trade wars is to bring more manufacturing into our country, but our factories are gone.
Thank you.
All right, Peter, you can
Oh, okay.
make some closing remarks.
You know what?
if you'd like.
Just a couple of things. Number one, this is so astonishing. I mean, this is one of the things, it's hard, this is a hard topic, it's having an effect on you, but this is an amazing group of people. I mean, think about the range of folks who spoke. You've got PC Construction, which is one of the premier construction firms in the country. And you've got hearing from a person making weaving in the yard, and our organic farmers, and our beer producers, and our cheese makers, and our 13-person firm that's doing truck beds. I mean, is Vermont amazing or what? That's what's so astonishing. All of you, I just can't get over it. And I appreciate how, I visited a lot of your business. I appreciate how hard it is to keep the lights on, to have good employees and train them, to be able to deal with the escalation and changes in cost, the challenges of marketing, of making certain that your customers are feeling well treated. So I got to tell you, it's just very inspiring for me to have on this call folks who represent so many different ways of being a Vermonter and making a contribution and being in your community and doing something that you love to do. So thank you. But the other part is a little bit of heartache here, because I do believe that the responsibility that your government has is to try to have policies that make it easier for you to do what is already a hard job. That's the job I have. Your job is harder than my job in a lot of ways, okay? Because you got to pay attention every single day. I have to argue about policy. So it's heartbreaking for me to see some policies coming out of Washington that make your hard jobs harder. This tariff makes no sense to me, especially with Canada. Some tariffs with China where there's real unfair trade practices, I could support the president's, I do support the president's concern about that. I definitely do. But where it's an ally, a friend, Canada and Mexico, we had that agreement with USMCA that actually has been beneficial all around. But especially Canada, and then the disruption very concretely that you're describing, and then it leading to us doing it a tariff, and then Canada's going to have to do their own tariff. So I am opposing these, but what's really helpful to me is this. When I talk to my colleagues, Republican or Democrat, but particularly Republican, because it's their president and they want to be supportive. If I'm telling them concrete stories about our construction firm, from PC to these builders we heard that do 5, 7, or 9 homes a year, to our maples industry, to our small farmers, then we're talking the same language, because they invariably will have an example of a comparable enterprise in their state. And then we're talking about, hey, this doesn't help you or help them. Help us. So it creates an opportunity for me, hopefully, to get more support to stop what I think would be harmful all around. So this means a lot to me, to be able to have your stories that I use in my efforts to persuade colleagues to join me in saying, hey, this is not a policy that makes a lot of sense. So thank you all very much. I do feel bad because I can't guarantee you what the outcome is going to be. Will the pause continue after 30 days? I mean, every fiber in my being wants to say, hey, don't worry about it. We got it covered. But I can't say that because I don't know. That's an ongoing contest down here. But what I can tell you is every single day, I'm going to be thinking about how this impacts on you and on Vermont, because each of you, you see together, you represent a significant part of the Vermont economy, and you certainly represent the Vermont spirit. Hey, we don't mind doing hard things. We don't. We'll face the day. But don't throw things on that are hard that make no sense, okay? And that's the spirit you've had to be successful in your enterprises. And I want to do everything I can to allow you to continue being successful doing what you're doing. So thank you very much for taking the time. And Fauna's here, Rebecca's here. And, anybody who wants to follow up with something specific that was better said privately than publicly, we're here. My job is to serve you. Rebecca's the leader of my Vermont office, and we're all ears, okay? Anything we can do, we want to do to be helpful. So thank you, and Have a good rest of the day. Take care, everybody.